Hello, I'm Jack Fink, and you're watching Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We begin with school safety and shootings in the parking lots of two North Texas high schools this week. The first Monday morning took place at Lamar High School in the Arlington ISD, where a student died of his injuries and another was hurt. The second shooting took place Tuesday afternoon at Thomas Jefferson High School in the Dallas ISD, where one student was hit in the arm. In both cases, other students were at schools already, and now both districts are reviewing what happened and considering more action. School security is a top priority among state lawmakers who are focused on new legislation.
There's a lot of work that we have to do. We cannot keep waking up to these stories.
The latest deadly school shooting in Arlington comes as state lawmakers are focused on doing more to improve safety and prevent the violence. As details emerge about today's shooting, high-priority bills filed in the Texas House would require an armed security officer on every school campus. There would also have to be a phone or some type of electronic device in each classroom, allowing teachers to reach school personnel or first responders right away. And there would be training for teachers and staff to identify students with mental health troubles. There's a similar bill in the Senate. All are in response to the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde last May that killed 19 students and their two teachers.
So these are parts of the solutions to those failures that we witnessed there. Actually, based on some of the things that we heard from across the state, they were occurring on campuses everywhere.
The whole point of the bill isn't to arm more teachers or have to stop more active shooters. It's hopefully to find these kids that are troubled and get them the help they need before it ever gets to this.
While there is bipartisan support this session to make schools safer, Republicans and Democrats don't see eye to eye when it comes to new gun safety legislation.
Making sure that weapons aren't in the hands of folks that would do us harm is certainly another part. It is a conversation that we don't get enough time, energy, and attention behind in this building. And
if you follow the law, it's harder for you to get a gun than if you don't follow the law. And I don't think passing more gun laws is going to change that. I think bad guys are still going to do bad things.
Lawmakers have proposed spending $600 million on school safety in the next 2 years. Here's more of our conversation with Democratic State Representative Joe Moody about the bill he's co-authored.
We cannot keep waking up to these stories. We can't have kids returning from spring break only to be greeted by tragedy. There are things that we can do right now, whether that's in a bill or just doing better with our local communities, that can help to solve these problems. And my hope is that everybody in Arlington is okay, is going to recover quickly, and then maybe we can start to focus on some of these issues that continue to pop up time and time again.
You're one of the authors on House Bill 3, and I believe perhaps House Bill 13 as well, which are two key bills in the House when it comes to school safety this session. And so I'm wondering, talk to us a little bit about why the provisions in there are so important, which include having an armed guard on every campus, having in the classroom either a phone or some kind of electronic device allowing teacher or substitute teacher to contact administration to get help right away, $15,000 for each campus to make physical security improvements, active shooter preparedness plan, larger infrastructure needs, having some grant program for that, and then compliance requirements for these school districts. So let's chat a little bit about that.
Sure. And these components of that bill are part of a broader approach that I think we need to take. Now, I spent a lot of time in Uvalde last year in the wake of the horrific mass shooting there. A lot of what you hear or what you just recited from this bill comes directly from the concerns that we heard in that community, but understandably so. These were concerns that we heard from many communities, but that was those very specific issues that popped up during that investigation. And so, whether it has to do with better law enforcement response, better able to secure a campus, mental health services available on campus, or making sure that we restrict certain firearms from certain individuals, those are all pieces of a broader puzzle to be able to bring a solution to a very multifaceted problem.
It seems like there's widespread support for both of these bills, and the Senate has similar legislation. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think most of my colleagues are ready, willing, and able to get involved in that part of the conversation, and that's a good thing, because, like I said, it is a part of the broader solution to a multifaceted problem. When we came out of the investigation in Uvalde, the main thing we wanted to impress upon people was that there were multiple systemic failures, right? So these are parts of the solutions to those failures that we witnessed there. Actually, based on some of the things that we heard from across the state, they were occurring on campuses everywhere. And so these are pieces of the puzzle to solving this, to helping to solve this problem, but they are not the only ones.
And I'm not sure. I would imagine they may have had a school resource officer on the campus, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But I'm wondering, does an armed guard, in your opinion, having one on each campus help?
It certainly can, and it certainly is something that we want to make sure campuses have the ability to do, if they choose to do that. I've heard from districts and campuses out in El Paso, where I'm from, that certainly want that they want to be able to have that level of security, and so trying to be as responsive as possible to the different approaches that people want to take. But that's certainly one that we heard time and time and time again, whether it was in Uvalde, in my community of El Paso, or anywhere else in the state.
When these bills were proposed, we talked to a parent about this, and his comment was these are good, but his thought was that the one thing that was missing is gun safety. And I know a variety of Democratic lawmakers have proposed gun safety legislation. My question is that really doesn't seem like that's going to advance in the legislature. What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I'll say I agree with that parent 100%. As I said before, there are multiple ways that we have to address the problem of school shootings, and school security is one piece of it, but making sure that weapons aren't in the hands of folks that would do us harm is certainly another part. It is a conversation that we don't get enough time, energy, and attention behind in this building, and historically that's been the case. My hope is that now we have the opportunity to bring some of those changes forward. I know that Tracy King from Uvalde has a bill which would raise the age of purchase for some of these weapons. I've got a number of bills that would also address some of the safety and security concerns. They're narrowly drawn, they're narrowly tailored, meant to fit within the legal constructs and frameworks that we're having to deal with, both under constitutional law and the case law that continues to come out. So I have to remain hopeful that we're going to push these items forward. They are an essential part of safety and security for our community. And so I'm happy to engage on conversations about how we put security on campus, but ultimately you still have to have the piece of the puzzle that addresses individuals accessing firearms that shouldn't be able to do that. And that has to be a part of this conversation. So we're going to continue to push for that. There is a select committee that's specifically set out in the Texas House to address that issue. The speaker created it specifically to do that. I think that's going to allow us to get a larger focus and maybe a magnifying glass on some of these proposals. The first hearing of that committee is tomorrow, and we're going to hear a number of bills that would help in this regard. And so we're going to keep on pushing for that, because we know that that is a part of the solution to safety and security concerns that we have.
I did want to ask you one thing about that, because there was a case recently in the Northern District of Texas. A federal judge said that the state's existing law keeping handgun purchases, they'd have to be 21 years or older, was unconstitutional. And I think the state backed off. They did not appeal that. Does that complicate things?
I certainly think it can complicate the conversation, but ultimately that is one federal district judge in one part of Texas. That is not something that is well settled case law, and also had to do with our license to carry legislation, and not with assault weapons. So different conversation. I think, although those types of cases as they come out can muddy the waters in terms of the conversation that we are having legislatively. I don't think we're talking about apples to apples there. So in my conversations with my colleagues, tried to point out exactly what type of court is making that decision and what they're making that decision on. And so that's an important distinction to make.
Two other questions, and I appreciate your time, and that was about some of the compliance requirements for the school districts under HB3. Do you think that they will have teeth in making sure that the schools do comply?
Ultimately, you have to strike a balance. There are realities in and around the classroom that I won't know because I'm not a teacher, I'm not an educator, I'm not on campus every day. We have to rely a lot on the expertise of those that are in our neighborhood schools. But you do have to have consequences if certain safety measures aren't in place. So you want to give people the opportunity to reflect the very hyper localized nature of how these rules work, but at the same time, you do have to have accountability. Otherwise, why have the rules in place to begin with? And so it is a fine balance to strike, but I think that we'll get there by the end of the day.
And my last question to you is, in the budget bills that were proposed in the House and the Senate, there was $600 million geared toward school safety. Do you think that's enough? And do you think that'll remain that way?
We'll have the budget on the floor of the Texas House in a couple of weeks. So we'll see how that conversation percolates when we get to that debate. It certainly, in my opinion, is a good start to addressing these concerns. But part of the really daunting task that was sat in front of us when we did our investigation in Uvalde is the number of campuses, the number of spaces that we're using for education in our state, the differing ages of them. Some have sophisticated technology now, some are, for lack of a better word, dilapidated. And so we have a lot to cover across the state. This is a very diverse state, and the way that our schools are set up in our neighborhoods is just as diverse. So I think it's a good start, and I think the conversation has to go forward to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all those neighborhood schools in whatever way, whatever way we can.
Democratic State Representative Joe Moody of El Paso, thank you so much for your time and insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Republican Ken King of Canadian, which is in the Texas Panhandle, agrees with much of what Moody says. But when it comes to new gun laws, King and Moody don't see eye to eye.
What I think would help, particularly with my bill and House Bill 13 and with House Bill 3, is more resources, particularly pointing toward mental health. I mean, the whole point of the bill isn't to arm more teachers or have to stop more active shooters. It's hopefully to find these kids that are troubled and get them the help they need before it ever gets to this stage. As far as what happened today, it is my understanding it happened in a parking lot. It wasn't actually in the classroom. And if that's true, I thank the Lord for that. There is so much in House Bill 3 and 13 and many other bills that support them. But the mental health aspect for me, I think, is the top priority.
And what would your bill, House Bill 13, do to help, at least on the mental health front?
Well, it would certainly provide vast resources for our teachers and our school personnel to be trained in behavioral and mental health. It would provide a funding source that works in perpetuity instead of whatever the legislature decides every couple of years. And I think it'll put an emphasis on teachers and school counselors having the behavioral health and the resources they need to spot these kids. From that standpoint, I think that's the biggest thing we can do. The other thing we can do as far as hardening of schools, the bills, my bill as well as House Bill 3, both call for to allow school districts to harden their schools the way they see fit. And that could come in many forms. Hardening a school may mean technology. It could mean armed guards. It could mean fences. My priority on that is to allow for local control to take over and never send a school an unfunded mandate.
And as far as I know, one of the provisions in HB3 would be to have an armed guard on every school campus. I'm
Mhm.
not sure about the situation today in Arlington, but do you think that's a good idea?
Personally, that for me, the type of districts I represent that are very small, very rural, I think it's a great idea. I don't think it's a feasible idea for where I live. I think that, and that's why we have a guardian program and a school marshal program, because one size doesn't fit all.
And your bill would allow school districts to figure out what their needs would be.
That's right.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about firearms. When I've talked to some parents, I talked to Representative Moody today. He and some parents say the state needs to make sure people who should not have guns don't get access to them. Where are you on that?
Well, I think laws, in most cases, police the people that follow them. People who don't follow the law are going to break the law regardless. So I'm not sure how to answer that. I'll tell you this. Um, I am not in favor of gun control. I like my guns. I have many of them. I think education is key, and I think we've seen a cultural shift in society. When I was in high school, the high school I grew up in, all my friends had guns in their vehicles on campus because we hunted every day after school. But nobody ever thought, oh, let's take it in the classroom. These are things that, while they haven't been, that it's not like they didn't happen back then. They get a lot more press today because of the 24-hour news cycle. But I haven't really changed my mind. I think guns are easily accessible, and if you follow the law, it's harder for you to get a gun than if you don't follow the law. And I don't think passing more gun laws is going to change that. I think bad guys are still going to do bad things.
I wanted to ask you about some of the provisions. I think it's HB3 that call for compliance requirements for school districts. That if the state legislature is going to come up with new rules and that they're going to be carried out by TEA, that there needs to be compliance. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think there definitely does need to be compliance, and if you look at the tragedy in Uvalde, I don't believe in pointing fingers. There was enough blame to go around that allowed Uvalde to happen. That everybody who's ever had anything to do with it at all probably shares some sort of the blame. But I do think, from a school district standpoint, if they're checking the box and not actually maintaining compliance, then they could ultimately have some culpability in these things. So I don't disagree with that provision in the statute. I think if the legislature passes it, school districts need to comply.
And I wanted to ask you, I believe it's your bill as well, HB 13, that has a provision for school districts to have an active shooter preparedness plan. That would be in addition to what's already part of the law. Is that right?
No, it would actually just be an extension. School districts are already required to have an active shooter preparedness plan along with their school safety plan. What we're calling for is more scrutiny of that plan and updating it more frequently. And if it's not updated, there certainly could be consequences for not complying, which is along the same lines as what you were just asking me about House Bill 3.
As far as compliance is concerned. And my last question, and I appreciate your time very much, and that is in the proposals for each chamber's budget, House and Senate, $600 million has been allocated for school security and safety. Do you think that's enough?
I think it's certainly enough for the the first biennium until some of the things we're working on in House Bill 13. What we're calling for is we want to create a grant program using the surplus that's in the foundation school program now to get us through the next school year. And then I've filed an HJR to go along with that, which would be a constitutional amendment that would allow the surplus of the foundation school program in perpetuity to go into an account that would fund school safety going forward, where we're never going to talk about this being an unfunded mandate. We're always going to give school districts the resources they need in this particular field. I've been on the public ed committee for 10 years in the House, and the thing I hear the most from parents and teachers is, and school personnel is, yeah, you want us to do these things, but you don't pay for it. Well, we should have acted in a manner that was more decisive after every shooting. But on the heels of Uvalde, we're going to act in a big way as a legislature, and we're going to ask the school district to do stuff that's hard, and we're going to ask them to do things that they haven't done in the past. But my plan is to make sure they get paid for it. So I think 600 million to get started, to get school districts that are behind right now on their, say, hardening of schools or their mental health professionals or whatever they need to fulfill their school safety plan. I think that's maybe enough money this time, but it's not enough money for perpetuity, and that's what we're trying to accomplish with House Bill 13.
I did have one other question based on what you just said, and that is the foundation school program and the surplus that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the $1 to $2 billion that was referenced by TEA Commissioner Mike Morath last month when he went before the Appropriations Committee?
I don't know. I don't recall what Commissioner Morath said. It's my recollection. There's about $3.5 billion surplus in the foundation school program currently, and under state law, if it's not spent for educational purposes, it goes back to the Treasury. And so I'm trying to attach some of those dollars to get us into the biennium until HJR could pass, where we could create the fund I just spoke of to fund school safety in perpetuity.
All right, so that sounds like a good area for me to go back to TA and ask them about that surplus.
Could be, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, State Representative Ken King of Canadian, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
You bet. Glad to be with you. Thank you.
We've heard from many of you about the rising property taxes, and you want a break. Texas lawmakers in the House and Senate have come up with two very different visions to cut your property tax bills.
We just haven't had any relief over the years.
Kathy Hill says her rising property tax bills have been challenging and frustrating. Both the Texas House and Senate have proposed very different plans to provide property owners like her some relief. In the House, lawmakers have proposed lowering the cap on property appraisals from 10% now to 5%. This applies for not only residential, but business and agricultural properties too. To make up for lost property tax revenue, the House plan would add state money to pay for public schools. So under the House plan, property owners would save on average $542 in 2024 and $733 in 2025, based on a $350,000 home.
HB 2 protects homeowners and businesses from the shock of rapidly rising property values, while also making it easier to plan for future investments and economic growth.
Over in the Senate, lawmakers have proposed increasing the homestead exemption to $70,000. That would provide $756 in savings in 2024 and nearly $800 in 2025 on a $331,000 home. For people over 65, the Senate plan would increase the homestead exemption to $100,000, and that would give seniors a savings of $1,033 in 2024 and $1,062 in 2025 on that same $331,000 home.
And what we have is tremendously good news for Texas taxpayers today. These are eye-popping, off-the-chart numbers of savings that they can realize through the Senate plan.
As for Kathy Hill, she says while she's paid off her mortgage, like everyone else, she's had to pay more for food and other items. So a cut in property taxes would be welcome news.
It will make a difference because there's just the ongoing costs of maintaining a home. And when you're on a fixed income, it would really, really help.
Republican State Senator Paul Bettencourt of Houston explains why he believes the Senate plan is better than the House plan.
A combination of permanent exemptions and compression make eye-popping numbers difference for the average homeowner. For the average home, they'll be able to save nearly $800, but wait, we're not done yet. For an over 65 and disabled home, it's over $1,000, about $1,062. These are tremendous savings because the most powerful thing you can do as a tax writer is to exempt, keep somebody from paying a tax. And that's what we do in the Senate plan. And that's why the homeowner numbers are off the charts.
In the House, as you know, they have a competing vision. Their vision is to lower the cap on how much the appraisal can go up from 10% on homes now to 5% on all properties, homes, businesses, agriculture. Why do you think your plan is more effective than the House plan?
Well, first off, we're continuing what has started in 2019. As values go up, tax rates are coming down. And those bills were Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3. And last year alone, we've already saved $11 billion by values up, rates down. Now, what happens when you artificially have a very low appraisal cap, which is what's in the House plan, what you really do is drive up inequities, the home stops selling, and in fact, the Texas Association of Business, the Texas Realtors, the Texas Taxpayer Research Institute, all oppose the House plan because of appraisal caps. They don't last long, and they're only in places where markets are hot. They're not across the state like a permanent exemption is, and they don't make the same impact every year. And in fact, an appraisal cap does nothing for over 65 homeowners on school taxes because their taxes are already frozen. The values going up don't affect the fact that over 65 homes are frozen, and that's 2 million homeowners that get nothing with an appraisal cap. So Senate plans an A for over 65 homeowners at over $1,000 a year savings, and unfortunately, it's an F on the House plan because they get zero.
And what about those who are younger than 65? Because as we know, appraisal values have gone up in Texas because Texas is hot right now. We know that people are coming here for jobs. There's not a lot of inventory. And so, at least in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and so people have seen their appraisals go up. I just interviewed a couple and their appraised value went up from $305,000 in 2019 to $410,000 in last year in 2022. So what do you say to those folks who worry that, yeah, even if their homestead exemption goes up, the appraised value will go up so much it would cancel out that homestead exemption?
Well, first off, the answer is what you pay. In the Senate plan, everyone will be able to go vote in November, and they're going to get these increased exemptions and this compression like that if they vote yes. It's going to be on the tax bill. You can flip over to the tax bill and see what's happened, because what's happened, for example, in places like San Antonio, Austin, and Houston, the average homestead is already down year to year. Now in Dallas, it was up about 2.5%. So it's no longer everything is up on an appraised value means your tax rate bill is up, your tax bill is up because we're compressing dollars. So what happens with this plan is that everywhere in the state, if it's approved, that the homestead ISD tax bill will be down next year for sure, because that's the mathematics of it.
And what about long term? Because I was looking at the dollars. You had mentioned $756 for most homeowners the first year, $798 for the second year. So that's what, over $1,500?
Sure.
Over 2 years. In the House, their bill for the first 2 years is maybe $1,300. So there's a difference there. But what about long term? When I spoke with Representative Morgan Meyer, he said that over the long term, their bill would be better for people.
Sorry, that's not how the math works. I'm an old tax assessor. It's real simple. Exemptions hit your bill every year, regardless of what happens to your value. Now, if you look at an appraisal cap, it may help you with the year, or maybe it's another year out of 6. but it's not every year. So long-term, there's no question. For example, the Senate plan, if you're a new homeowner, you're going to save roughly $800 per year. That's $24,000 just on your school tax bill off on a 30-year mortgage. There's simply no comparison. And if people are doing the math correctly, they come out with the right answer. That's again why the Texas Taxpayer Association, the Texas Realtors, Texas Association of Business all oppose appraisal caps, and they all support the Senate plan SB 3.
And so you and all the senators and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick are very focused, and this is what you're behind. Similarly, in the House, the leadership there is behind their plan. And so I'm wondering, how will, if they pass HB 2, how will the leadership in the Senate and the House come together and hash out an agreement? You'll have to compromise, right?
Well, the important point is the Senate's already put their plan out. And we've got all 31 senators on it because we voted for homestead exemptions once before. In fact, the public approved it in 2022, and the House passed it unanimously. So I'm kind of at a loss as to why the House is not considering additional homestead exemptions now, because it's already been proven to work. And so all we can do is pass out our bills, which we did 31-0, because it's not just the homestead exemptions are better than appraisal caps. It's the compression, how we're doing the compression. We're actually knocking the floor out of the old school recapture code, and we're getting our compression down to over 700 ISDs that are currently blocked because they can't get below the maximum compressed or the floor rate. We've got a great business package, which the House doesn't have, which is get rid of the nuisance PPP tax for tens of thousands of business owners, just in Dallas County alone. And we also have a first-time inventory tax credit, and to take that off of the hated franchise tax for business owners. That's why we got the Texas Association of Manufacturing, the Chemical Council, a bunch of people supporting Senate Bills 4 and 5. We've got a great plan. It's $16.5 billion. I never thought I would be able to, in my life, go sit before Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who we've been working on property tax relief for 20 years, take all of our experience and be able to give back $16.5 billion of the public's money. It was a great day in the Senate.
And I wanted to ask you, because it's a lot of technical terms with compression and all that. Basically, you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about reducing the amount of property tax that's going to pay for schools, and instead taking other state revenues, sales tax and other revenues, and putting that instead to pay for public schools. Is that right?
Right, because we've all been on this idea that as values go up, tax rates come down, so bills come down. We've already had $11 billion of success just in 2022. And what we're doing now in the Senate bills, and we're basically having the state step up and pay the difference. So school taxes are down because the state's stepping up their share. And you can do that by targeting exemptions. You can do that by credits. You can do that by compression. And that's a way to make sure that property taxpayers aren't blown out of their home and business. And remember, this is general revenue. So it's a mixture: sales tax, severance taxes, a bunch of TABC tax. There's a bunch of revenue streams in that, but we get to focus on where we know the problems are: keeping homeowners in their homes, keeping business from being blown out, and more importantly, giving tax relief on the broadest sense to everybody, and not using an appraisal cap tool that won't help over 65 seniors. And it is actually regressive, because the problem is that it helps much higher dollar homes far more than lower price property or lower middle income homes. And we're staying out of those traps by having a great plan in the Senate that has every Republican and Democrat behind it. I hope everyone listens to that plan, especially our colleagues in the House.
And I did have one other question. I was watching the Senate vote yesterday, and you had a conversation with Senator Kelly Hancock from our area. And I believe he was talking about that because of the way the school formulas worked in the past couple of years, since the 2021 budget was passed, correct me if I'm wrong, he was saying, and I heard from the Mike Morath, the TEA commissioner, and he was telling the House several weeks back that the prediction of school attendance the prediction was higher than the actual attendance. And so if I heard correctly, he was saying that there's $1 to $2 billion parked at TEA of revenue just sitting there. And, you know, I don't know where it's going to end up. I guess it goes back to the general fund. Is that something that you've heard about? And was that what Senator Hancock was referring to?
Well, what Senator Hancock and I were talking about before was the problem of when you try to compress tax rates, get the tax rates down on schools, you run into a floor. It's called the maximum compressed rate. We've got 698 school districts stuck at that floor, which is roughly 80 cents on $100 of school maintenance and operation taxes. We've got a recapture language that basically carves a hole in that and pushes all that money down to taxpayers. There's actually going to be 19 school districts taken off recapture, but we're not done yet. We're going to make sure that all those districts are held harmless by putting in more money to make sure that our change in tax policy doesn't lower what they're getting from the state on state support. All this is making sure that schools stay whole, and we're even adding that with bills like Senate Bill 9, which is going to increase teacher pay, et cetera. So even if the commissioner is thinking he's got $1 billion or $2 parked, trust me, the money's going to be spent, but it's going to be spent on raises and on property tax relief, which are two good things.
State Senator Paul Bettencourt, Republican of Houston, thank you so much for joining us and giving us insight on your bills. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The author of the House bill, Republican Representative Morgan Meyer of Dallas, disagrees with Bettencourt's assessment.
The reason this is important is that myself and pretty much every other representative, Republican or Democrat alike, when we go home, this is the top of mind issue. This is the most important issue that I'm hearing about from my constituents is property tax and property tax relief. It is one of the issues that is bipartisan as it can get. And it's one of the ones that we are going to address this session. And it's one of the ones that, as I said, we are hearing about from our constituents on a daily basis. And HB2 and HJR1 do just that. They provide real property tax relief. They provide the largest tax cut in the history, property tax relief in the history of the state of Texas. And we look forward to bringing that back to our constituents.
And so let's talk a little bit about the bill. This would basically lower the cap on appraisals, how much they can go up from 10%, which is what it is now, to 5%. And this is not only for homeowners, this is for every property owner who pays property tax, right? So
that's correct.
Agricultural.
That's correct. And that's part of the bill. So we lower the appraisal cap from 10% to 5% for homeowners. And then we put a 5% appraisal cap on all real property. Currently, right now, there is no appraisal cap to help out that small business owner, to help out those that do not own a home. This actually provides certainty for those small business owners. It allows for them to know, hey, my appraisal in the past has gone up. Literally, we've heard from witnesses that it has gone up 100% in just 1 year. This allows for it only to go up 5%. It provides certainty for these small business owners, and obviously provides homeowners relief by decreasing how much your taxable value can go up by 5%. But that's only part of the bill. The other part of the bill is, and a very important part, is the compression part, and that means we're lowering your taxes. We're putting in $11.2 billion to lower your tax rate, to compress the tax rate down, to provide real property tax relief that for a homeowner of a home of $350,000 is about $1,200 in the first 2 years. But not only that, this bill also does something which we haven't done in over a decade. It increases the state's share of public education funding to over 50%. We have not been there in over a decade. The state is stepping up. We're funding public education. And the other part of it is that we're also reducing what's called recapture Robin Hood by $4.5 billion. So this bill is property tax relief, but it's education funding, and it certainly is helping out the business owner as well as the home.
And when you talk about compression and talk about increasing, you're basically talking about the point you just made is as you reduce the amount of property taxes that pay for public schools, you're increasing other state revenues like sales tax and other revenues to pay for public schools. Is that right?
Well, we're not increasing any taxes. No, we're just
No, but
using
you're using you're
surplus.
using the
Correct.
state share,
Yes.
the state revenues more than the property tax revenues.
Correct. We're increasing the state's burden. The state, what we should have been doing for forever, Jack, we should increase the state's share of funding of public education. And in HB2, we do that. We increase it to over 50%.
And so what was the change? And it may have been very minor in the committee substitute that from the original.
It just had to do, honestly, Jay, it had to do with making sure that those owners of mobile homes receive the same homestead benefit, the appraisal cap benefit as other homeowners did.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about, there's been a lot of discussion about, well, how will this help renters? Because if you don't own property, but you rent an apartment, and so many Texans do, how would this help?
So that is the appraisal cap part of it. And so what we're doing is for those folks who own, whether it's an apartment complex or whether it's a home and they rent it out, now their appraisal cap will be at 5%. So those who own the apartment complex or own the home and rent it out, their values have been going up astronomically over the past 3 or 4 years, and they have been passing that on to the renter. But now that they have a certainty with a 5% cap, with their appraisal only going up by that incremental amount, they can then pass along those savings to the renters.
I mean, obviously you can't legislate that. Correct. I think it would have an impact.
I do. I really do. I mean, and just from hearing from folks after we filed HB2, I heard from those who have homes they rent out, those who own apartment complexes, they said, look, we've never had this certainty before. We have never had the certainty of only knowing that it's going to go up by 5%. And so because of that certainty, they are going to be able to pass that on to the renter.
I wanted to ask you, as you know, the state Senate yesterday unanimously passed its version of property tax cuts, and that is increasing the homestead exemption for most homeowners to $70,000 from $40,000 now. And for those 65 and older, it is increasing to $100,000. And then businesses would go from $2,500 to $25,000 for their property exemption. And then also it would cut the business inventory tax by 20%. And as you know, senators have said their plan would be more effective than the House plan. What is your reaction to that?
Well, we like our plan in the House. We do, because it's twofold, and it benefits both business owners and homeowners. First off, we provide much more compression buying down taxes than does the Senate plan by a considerable amount. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but again, ours is 11.2. If I remember correctly, theirs is more about 5.9 billion in that. And so we provide a great deal more compression. Ours is, when you take HB1 and HB2 together, is about 25 cents of compression. And if I remember correctly, the Senate's is only 17 cents of compression. So we are providing in the House the largest tax cut in the history of the state of Texas. Additionally, as it relates to the homestead exemption, we have done that, and we in the House supported it at the end of last session. But we want to try something new. We want to try something bold, and that's what we're doing in the House, because the issue with just increasing the homestead exemption is that stagnant. And so, as I've said before, when I'm at my son's basketball game, no one is coming up to me and saying, Morgan, we absolutely need an increase in our homestead exemption. Everyone is coming up to me and saying, Morgan, what is going on with my appraisal? What is the issue? Because the problem with the homestead exemption is it's a stagnant number. So if the appraisal, which we all know they do, go up by greater than what the Senate has increased the homestead exemption, then our constituents will see no property tax relief. They will not feel that in their bill, because their bill will still go up. But what we're doing is we are compressing, we're providing the largest tax cut in history, and then we're saying, all right, we're not only going to provide you this tax relief, we're going to make sure, and on a go-forward basis, we're going to slow the growth of your property tax bill with the appraisal cap as it relates to homestead, as it relates to all property. And so that's why we are very confident in the House's version of our bill, and we're very confident in our plan to provide real, lasting property tax relief to our constituents.
And I wanted to ask you because the lieutenant governor and Senator Betancourt and other senators had a news conference early last week, and they were, facing these kinds of questions from reporters. And the lieutenant governor said that under the House plan, property taxes could go up because he said it would go against the existing law, which requires an election if cities and counties raise their property tax revenues by more than 3.5%, and school districts raise their property revenues by more than 2.5%. Is that true?
I'm going to respectfully disagree with Lieutenant Governor. This does nothing to affect anything that we did 2 sessions ago as it relates to the 3.5% cap or the 2.5% cap. The local taxing entities are still going to have to go to the voters if they want to go over those rates. This does nothing to affect that at all. And additionally, as I stated, we're not taking any property values off of the books. We are slowing the rate go forward. So those local entities are still going to have to go seek voter approval if they want to go over 3.5% and 2.5%. And this bill does nothing to affect or change that. This bill slows growth forward and it provides certainty for homeowners and business owners on a go forward basis. And that's what I'm hearing. And that's what all of us are hearing from our constituents is certainty as it relates to their appraisal.
And I wanted to ask you, as far as the numbers that you gave, the $350,000 home, it's you said about $1,200, over $1,200, maybe closer to $1,300 for 2 years. The Senate version is over $1,500 for most homeowners. So what makes your plan better if their average is on a lower value home of $331,000? So what's the takeaway for people? It's a lot of different numbers. How do you provide certainty that your plan would be better?
Because it provides for future years. And what I mean by that is when we get back to the appraisal cap issue versus the homestead exemption issue, their homestead exemption, again, because it's a stagnant flat number, is going to be swallowed up by appraisal in year 1. Ours is going to cap the appraisal. So therefore, we're going to compress it down, but ours is going to be longer lasting and more over into the future because we have the appraisal caps to restrict the growth of the appraisal. So we're lowering your taxes, and then we're saying, all right, we're going to lower your taxes now immediately and on a go forward basis, but we're also going to say we're going to constrain your appraisal growth so everyone is going to actually see this relief on a go forward basis. The homestead exemption is going to be evaporated, gone within a year or two because appraisals are so out of control.
Right. So you're basically saying your plan protects people further out into the future because property values, for the most part, go up, and this way it'll cap those and not be susceptible to just a flat homestead exemption.
Yes, that's correct.
And so, given these differing bills, these are there are two competing bills. And so you and the House are very committed to this. I know Speaker Phelan is very committed to this. And the same side, the Senate and the Lieutenant Governor are very committed to their plan. So how do you see this all shaking out?
Well, we will, as we always have done, get together with the Senate after we pass out HB 2 and HJR 1. And I know that they've just passed out SB 3, 4, and 5. And we will sit down and we will have a discussion. As the Speaker said, we're not taking anything off the table. Like, we are going to work with the Senate because we believe that providing property tax relief is of utmost importance. So this is the beginning of a discussion with the Senate. We have our plan. We believe and truly believe it is the best path forward, but we will certainly work with the Senate. We're not taking anything off the table to provide real property tax relief to all Texans.
And I did have 2 other questions on the subject, and I really appreciate your time on this. And that is the one point that the Lieutenant Governor and Senator Betancourt were making is that property caps, lowering from 10 to 5%, won't really have an impact on seniors because their properties are capped pretty much. So what do you make of that argument?
Well, this is going to provide real relief to all. whether they are seniors or not seniors. And that is not only the caps, and I appreciate us having a discussion about the caps, but and having a discussion about the exemptions, but then we also need to focus again on the compression. And that's going to provide real relief to all Texans. And because our compression, again, and say for the third time, it's the largest tax cut in the history of the state of Texas, all Texans are going to feel that relief. And so this is a bill in its totality that provides all Texans real property tax relief.
Republican State Representative Morgan Meyer of Dallas, thank you so much. I know you've got to get to the House floor, so thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it as well.
Education remains in the political spotlight in Austin. Aside from school safety, the Texas Senate held a hearing for a controversial bill that would allow taxpayer money to be given to some students so they can go to private school.
No real questions, but
in a packed room, senators debated school choice. Under SB 8, $8,000 in taxpayer money would be given to certain students each year for education savings accounts, or ESAs. To be eligible, students who apply and receive the grants must have attended public school 90% of the time in the prior year, unless the children were in kindergarten or pre-K. Those in private school wouldn't be eligible.
I'll bet on Texas moms and dads to do their homework above and beyond politicians all day long to make the decisions that are best for their kids.
The accountability issue concerns me. The transparency issue concerns me also. Whereas we have school systems that have to, public school systems, that have to be accountable. We don't have transparency here at all.
To help smaller school districts, those with fewer than 20,000 students would receive $10,000 for each student using ESAs for each of the first 2 years. Other school districts, though, would lose some state school funding if their students go to private school using the ESAs. And that concerned at least one senator.
Then we should just hold harmless every school district.
With funding?
With funding, yeah.
Right now, the state estimates there are 250,000 students in private schools statewide. The Texas Education Agency projects the private schools could accept 25,000 new private school students statewide in 2025 and could accept about 5,000 new students in 2026 to 2028. Bishop Michael Olson of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, who represents 1.1 million Catholics in North Texas, supports the bill.
The first priority has to be the preferential option for the poor by ensuring students with the greatest academic and financial need are prioritized.
Your voice matters the most.
Governor Greg Abbott is pushing hard for the bill to pass.
The solution to all of this is to empower parents to choose the school that's right for them, and that's what we will pass this legislative session here in Austin, Texas.
The Senate Education Committee left SB 8 pending, but it's expected to pass in the Senate. No word yet how much support it will have in the House, where school choice bills have died before. The state estimates by 2028 the education savings accounts could cost nearly $1 billion. That would come from general revenues, not school funds. But with more students receiving those grants, the state expects to save nearly $335 million by 2028 in school funding. That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you for joining us. You're watching CBS News Texas.